Hello, it is still the 12th of July 2023 and I just want to close this door. And I'm still reading Life as Carola. That's Joan Grant's life in the 16th century, 500 years ago. She was the illegitimate daughter of Lord Griffin, that is Carola. This book was written by Joan Grant, who lived 1907 till 1989, and these are her memories of that life. We are now at chapter 19. I've read all the others. She is in a convent now after an adventurous time she's had. Chapter 19, Snow in Heaven. Sister Francesca was the only nun with whom I felt an unspoken bond of friendship. There was a strange remoteness about her, as though she belonged to a company of different flesh to ordinary women. Her eyes were the clear remote blue of the sky, washed clean by a storm, and her skin seemed to share the quality of white flowers at dusk, as though in the dark it would still reflect the light. One day I saw her coming from the bakehouse carrying a heavy wooden tray, piled with loaves of black bread. The sweat stood out on her forehead as if she were in pain, but I tried to take the tray from her. She shook her head and hurried along the cloister. I saw she was ill, so I followed her into the empty refectory. She managed to put down the tray on one of the long benches. For a minute she stood upright, then fell as a tree falls when the axe has conquered it. I untied her girdle and loosened the heavy folds of her habit. Then, through her coarse shift, I saw the springing curve of her belly. I was frightened that someone might come into the room and surprise her secret, so before I went to get water to bathe her forehead, I re-knotted her girdle. When I returned, I shaved her delicate wrists and tried to send my thoughts to comfort her. It seemed a long time before she stirred. When she tried to sit up, I said, "Don't be frightened. There is no one here else. You have fainted and you must rest for a little while." She lay back and closed her eyes. "I'm your friend and will not betray you. I'm going to help you to escape from this prison of hypocrisy. You must believe me." Her eyes, the shadowed, withdrawn eyes of a nightmare-ridden child, stayed staring at me. I went on. "Yes, I know your secret. I'm so glad I know it, for you must need a friend, as I do. You mustn't let the nuns make you afraid. You must go back into the world where men and women are real people, not weary puppets, moved by the rope that tolls the bell for office." I heard someone approaching. "Quick, you mustn't be found like this, or there will be questions." I managed to lift her to her feet, and when Sister Margarita came into the room, she was leaning on the table, seeming to watch me putting the bread in orderly rows, as though she were afraid I might try to steal some of it. I did not have another chance to talk to Francesca alone until the following day. I had been working in the garden, trying to break the heavy earth, still chained by frost, into furrows for the early sowing. Massing clouds were hastening the dusk when I met her in the cloister. She signed to me to follow her into the deserted chapel, then whispered that I was to kneel beside her as though we were in prayer. The chapel door always creaked when it was open, so I knew we were secure from being overheard. She looked around her to make sure we were alone, then she seemed to take courage. "Last night I dreamt that you came into my cell. There was a light about you, and at first I thought I was seeing an angelic vision, and fell on my knees in piety. Then you smiled at me and said, 'It is I, Carola, the novice, to whom you have entrusted your secret. You are dreaming too. Come, take my hand, and I will lead you back into the past, where I can prove our friendship.' Then I knew that I was a boy, and you were a young knight of the Third Crusade. When you rode into battle, I ran at your stirrup. The ground stank of death. I was afraid. Then the scene changed. Now it was I who rode the tired horse, and you were leading it through a barren valley, a valley of parched rocks and stunted thorn trees. You had put off your armor, and your surcoat was stained with rusty blood. Thirst was our enemy, and a pitiless sun, and in the sky death wheeled in ominous wings. Years passed. Now we were in a different country, a country of kindly earth and water meads, and you were old. Your wife and daughter wept that you were dying, but it was to me, your dear friend, that you last smiled. Why did I have this dream? Tell me, for I am bewildered by my own thoughts. I but came to remind you why you may trust me. Now we wear a different armour. Our enemies are unseen. They cry the air like carrion birds. Ignorance curves their claws and fear their beak. We have no castle to hold a siege, nor swords of Damascus steel. We have only a little knowledge to dwell in, and a little friendship to shield our loneliness. Tell me of Francesca, for yesterday she and Carola met as strangers. And then Francesca told me her story. I was an only child, and my mother died when I was very young. My father had loved her so dearly that he took no other woman into his life, and he tried to forget his sorrow by filling his thoughts with the strategies of worldly affairs. Youth was not in our house, and my nurse was strict, and would not let me play with the servants' children. The youngest son of the family, whose land joined ours, was near my age. The falconer who rode with him was kinsman to my nurse, perhaps more than kinsman, and every day they met in the forest. Guillermo and I played together, and neither of us wished for any other companion. When I was 14, we were betrothed, and there were no shadows over our days. We were to have been married on the day I was 15, but before I became his wife, Guillermo had to ride to the wars in the train of his uncle. He was taken prisoner of Milan, and for 3 years I waited for news of him. Whenever I heard a horseman ride in the courtyard, I thought it was his messenger. I was so sure he will be alive that with my women I stitched at my bridal clothes, and with his wolfhound beside me I tarried in the glades that we had known. Then they told me he was dead. Some said by poison, some said by a dagger. There was no sun and no moon any more. I lived in twilight, as though I were already a ghost. No tears came to cool my heart, though I prayed that the compassion of the Holy Mother would bring them to my ease. My father told me that in the convent I might find assuaging peace, and so I came here to wait for death to fulfill my betrothal vows. But prayers did not release me, and the old abbess taught me that there is no escape from life save by living it. Soon after my novitiate was completed, there was a visitation of plague in the city. On my body the blue swellings would have had the beneficence of stigmata, yet though I saw many die who longed to live, the plague watched me, mocked, aloof, and left me unclaimed. Gradually I learned some measure of tranquillity. One day I was sent to answer the summons to the bedside of a dying child. When I entered the town by the old gate, the snows were falling to bless the new year. The clouds were pigeon grey, and the flakes fell upon me in gentleness. I followed a narrow alley in the shadow of the town wall. My feet made no sound on the drifts, and the shutters were closed, for the people kept their houses against the cold. I saw a cloaked figure approaching. He stood aside to let me pass. I thought it strange there should be snow in heaven. When I had walked through the gates of paradise, why had I seen no angel guarding them? In Guillermo's eyes I saw the same thoughts. I was afraid to touch him, lest it might be that angels had no substance. I heard a street vendor crying his wares. We drew apart. The world closed in about us. As I moved, I heard the clicking of my rosary, and remembered I was a prisoner of my vows, knew that the only dowry I could bring my love was death, for the papal authority shows no clemency to a man that robs Christ of a bride. I entreated him to leave me, but he would not listen. He took me into the little house where lived his foster mother. She was away and the room was empty. He threw fresh fagots on the smouldering ashes, and we sat together in the twilight, in the firelight, as we had used to do in the hut of a friendly woodcutter in the winter forest. He told me what had befallen him since I had watched him ride away. He had been kept prisoner for nearly 7 years, and when he had all but despaired of freedom, the old Duke died, and he was released when the son unlocked the father's dungeons. He was so sure that he would find me waiting for him, but when he rode into the courtyard, he saw that the grass grew between the flagstones before a deserted house. An old servant told him that my father was dead, and death had marked me for her own before ever I went into the convent, and I must long since have gone beyond the reach of priest or lover. Then Guillermo came to Perugia to see his foster mother, who used to live in our village, in hope of news of me. He pleaded with me to ride with him to France. If it had been only my own soul that I should have condemned to hell, it would have been a small price for a few years of his company, but he would have followed me to the eternal torment. At last I made him believe that we could not find our heaven upon earth, and I must live out my life in the half-world to which I had vowed myself. I told him that he must remember our meeting only as a vision of the future, and think of me as having returned from beyond the grave, with fond assurances that I awaited him in heaven. His voice was so much clearer than my vows, and I was eager for his memory to cherish me through the long, long, lonely years. It was dawn before we said our farewells, and we had lain together in simplicity, desperate concealment. I think the Madonna cannot have been more joyous than was Francesca that she should bear a child. There was about her a strange tranquility that seemed to protect her from the fear of discovery, and she discussed our plans for the birth as calmly as if she had been instructing a midwife who would deliver her in her husband's house. I was glad that I had lived among people to whom the cycle of life was common knowledge, for if I had not been able to count the months for her, she would not have known when her child would be ready for the world. Since Lucia's miscarriage, I had seen another baby born. It was to the wife of an innkeeper with whom Petruccio and I were lodging. It had been an easy birth, for it was her 5th child, but she had moaned and cried until her frightened husband was calling on the saints for pity. Near the nuns' burial place there was a mound which covered what must have once been part of an old crypt. Here had been built a peritoneal cell shaped like a coffin, so that the one who was shut into it should think of herself as already dead, and so repent more intensely of her sins. It was a rare punishment. What is that? It's playing up. The music is playing up. Well, it has to be without music. It was a rare punishment for a novice to be shut in there, but I had already experienced it. Even at midday it had been like living under the sea, for only a dim green light crept through the encroaching weeds which covered the grating in the roof. I had been there when winter was pitilessly cold. The cell had been empty save for a heap of mouldy straw, and the damp floor was slippery with ice. It was a strange place to choose for a woman to be confined, but it had what to us was the greatest of all necessity, secrecy. It was not unusual for a nun to go there for retreat, sometimes for a week, sometimes for longer, as a self-inflicted penance. She would not attend the services in the chapel or have communication with the other nuns. Every second day, a small loaf and a pitcher of water were set on the ledge outside the Judas, and on the last day of the prescribed period the cell door was unlocked when the nuns went to rest before the midnight office, so that the penitent could return to her own cell. We decided that when this day of her release came, Francesca would wake the nun who had the key of the outer gate, telling her that it was because she had been ordered to go into the town. If she carried a basket, it would cause no comment, but this time the cloth which covered it would conceal not bread nor healing ointment, but a new baby child. Francesca seemed quite confident that she would have the strength to walk to Perugia and return before dawn, and that by the time the convent gate closed behind her again, her child would be in the arms of Guillermo's foster mother. I should not be able to reach the door of the cell, for the passage that led to it was closed by a gate of iron bars, which was always kept locked, but the grating which opened into the cell was hidden by a thicket of elder bushes. I found that the plaster which held it in place had begun to crumble, and after working at it for several days with a rusty nail, I managed to loosen it sufficiently to lift it clear. It was not large enough for me to climb through, but I could lower things down into the cell, and as I still worked with those who tended the sick, it was not difficult for me to steal rags, which I hid until they should be needed. The summer was very hot, but the plague did not visit Perugia, and for many weeks no summons came for a nun to go into the town. When we had almost begun to despair of getting a message to Guillermo's foster mother, a call to go to a child dying of the pox was answered by Francesca. I had been so afraid that she might find that the foster mother had gone away, and that our careful plans were defeated, but as soon as I saw her after her return, I knew that all was well. Francesca, has she agreed to our plans? Yes, she is a brave woman. I warned her it would be dangerous to harbour a nun's child even for a day, but she only smiled and said, "He will be my foster grandson. My arms are for this protection, and my house is to shelter him." She told me that every week a messenger came to her from Guillermo in case word for him had come from me. He has well provided her with money, and as soon as I take the child to see her, she will hire a litter and set forth immediately to him. Can't you go with them? No, Carola. I have taken vows, and I must hold to them, though I have found in my love for Guillermo a blossoming of the spirit such as never came to me through cloistered austerity. Your place is in the world with your child and your husband. How can Guillermo bear to live knowing that you are shut away by these convent walls, that your heart longs for him, as his does for you? He will not think of me here. His foster mother will tell him that I died when the child was born. It is better so, for then he will think of me as being tranquil in heaven, content to wait there until he joins me, and he will be able to rejoice in his child without sorrowing for his mother. Some of the nuns are very old, Francesca. You may live here alone more than 50 years. Through my child, I shall live in the world. He will be very splendid. He will be tall and strong with a bright chivalry. He will be in the likeness of his father, for so I have fashioned him. But he will have my eyes, and through them I shall see Guillermo, and in them I shall see my love. I have kept fear away from me, for he must be created only of joy, and I shall give the happiness I have never known to him for a birth gift. There will be a spring of laughter in his heart to refresh him when he has to pass through weary days. I have kept fear away from me, for he must be created only of joy, and I shall give the happiness I have never known to him for a birth gift. There will be a spring of laughter in his heart to refresh him when he has to pass through weary days. He will have the mind of a poet, and through him my lover's thoughts shall be burnished into words. He will have the eyes of a painter, for he must see the beauty of the world twice, for himself and for me. One day he will marry, and his wife will love him, even as I loved his father, and they will have children in joy together. Wow!